welcome everybody to this fifth and final one in the Cambridgeshire Historic Churches Trust series of online lectures. I'm glad to see that we have people from all over the place, quite a bit, large parts of England, and indeed even from overseas. So welcome everybody. That's absolutely marvellous. This session will be recorded and will be available subsequently on our website. For the benefit of people who are not already members of Cambridgeshire Historic Churches Trust, the Trust exists to give loans and grants to help churches with repairs and improvements like kitchens and lavatories. That's churches in the county of Cambridgeshire, which includes the Peterborough area. There are more than 300 of those churches. Many of them, especially in rural areas, are looked after by congregations which maybe are only a handful of people. And they have to meet the cost of looking after the building as well as paying for their clergy. So if you're not a member and would like to subscribe and support our efforts, we'd be delighted if you could join. And anyway, you could donate on our website, whether you're not a member. Both of those things should be quite easy to do. By the way, I'm David Stasiger. I'm one of the trustees of the Trust. We normally, as well as our help for churches, we hold conferences and church tours. Now, all our activities at the moment are online, although we hope to renew in-person activity in 2022. But of course, the good side of having to do things online is that we have been able to get some new audience members from wider afield who wouldn't be able to come to Cambridgeshire, including, as I was saying a moment ago, some people I'm pleased to see from overseas. Now, this series of lectures about churches, towers and spires and the things found in them and on them, those are the most prominent features of our local churches, both visibly and sometimes audibly. So our series of lectures has been dealing with things like clocks and bells and bell frames and so on. But now, now we're in our final and keynote feature, which is about the towers and spires themselves. Before I introduce our speaker, just one or two technical points. Please, could you make sure that you are muted, so that any sounds that you manage to make during the lecture don't get broadcast. Now, if you have any questions for our speaker, could you please click on the chat button and type them in, so that they're then visible to our speaker and to everybody else. And you can do this, of course, at any time, so it enables you to put these questions in at the point in the lecture, rather than having to wait till the end to put the questions. So tonight's speaker, we're delighted to welcome him back again, because he gave the first in the series as well. Robert Walker was for many years the honorary secretary of our trust. But in addition to the administrative skills that he wielded in that role, he is a distinguished artist, an art and architectural historian. And those of you who belong to the Trust for many years will recall the excellence of his guided tours of local churches. As I said, this evening is, in a sense, it's a keynote speech, even though it comes at the end, because it's about pulling the subject together with the towers and spires themselves. So, Robert, we look forward to hearing from you.
So anyway, well, thanks for asking me to speak about towers and spires. Well, I'm going to begin with some of the earliest buildings, and then I'm going to do a rapid tour of the county, a great sweep around the the east of the county, and then through the fens and the marsh and down the west side. It won't be in great depth, it will be oversimplified, and I'm only going to consider things pre-1700. I'm afraid it will be rather more travelogue than an academic exercise, and I hope you'll forgive the occasional digression into the churches themselves and into my own Cambridgeshire past. For I think there's little use in our heritage if it doesn't have these wider and human connections. I'd suggest that the first determinant of the quality, the architectural quality of towers and spires is the geology of the area. And this is a map of Cambridgeshire, and it's a very interesting map because it gives rise to a huge variety. In the southeast, we have this band of chalk. Then in the center, we've got a stripe of carstone with clay and mudstone. And then up in the far northwest is the limestone. And if you're in any doubt that the quality of stone affects the quality of the architecture, this marvelous book, 50 Spires, by Julian Flannery, plots his 50 spires on the map of England. And of course, they more or less follow the great sweep of limestone across the country. There are other, of course, crucial factors. Money. It's interesting, of course, that much of the money was on the limestone with the wool and the grazing, but we might also consider civic and monastic pride. I think there's a connection between monastic ownership and the quality of the architecture, and certainly civic pride. I mean, these great outliers away from the freestone, these are the important towns. And in Lincolnshire, this is Louth, the highest steeple in Britain, is clearly an expression of civic and religious pride. But transport, certainly in our area, is also crucial. Waterways allowed the good stone, Barnack stone, Weldon stone, to be carried into the fens and beyond. Yet even in an area with no freestone, the inventiveness and wealth of patronage led to a dizzying display of variety in forms, dizzying in form and ambition. This is a card that I made for the late Jane Noyce, a colleague when I worked for South Cambridgeshire District Council. It was all the towers in her area of work, the southwest corner of South Cambs. They're all cobble and clunch, with some freestone reserved for dressings and the few spires. But let's begin with perhaps the oldest tower, and that's St. Benet's in Cambridge. It's generally thought to be Saxon. It's unbuttressed. It has these diminishing stages. It's built of rubble stone, and it has these very distinctive long and short quoins, which are typical of Saxon work. And that marvelous original opening at the top with these paired openings divided by a baluster, again, very typical of the period. The great H.M. Taylor thought that St. Benet's Tower had a helm roof, and he sketched it in his book. And here I've shown the actual helm roof that survives at Sompting in Sussex. Cecil Hewitt, in his book on English historic carpentry, drew the helm roof at Sompting. Here it is. A lot of very interesting innovations in carpentry. I met Cecil Hewitt through the East Anglia Conservation Forum. He was in Essex. He was part of that circle of very interesting architectural historians, including the late John McCann. And it would be very interesting if we still had that structure. It would have been one of the great sites of Cambridgeshire if it had survived. Of similar date is the lower part below the belfry openings of the tower at Barnack. But Barnack, of course, is on the doorstep of that most important medieval quarry. That magnificent limestone came out of this quarry. But it still has some of the same features. It has the long and short work of the quoins, these very typical pilasters. And we see how the Anglo-Saxons were trying to develop the architecture of columns and capitals and mouldings in this building. And in the tower arch in particular, this almost bizarre arrangement of mouldings is a sort of early exploration, I think. The upper part of this is also really, really very significant. This is possibly one of the earliest spires in Britain. This is a 13th century spire added onto the Saxon base. Barnack is a truly marvelous church. It contains some absolute wonders. This the sculpture of Christ's Majesty of the 11th century, which was found face down in one of the aisles. And in the south aisle, this marvelous survival, how this got through the various iconoclasms, I don't know, of Mary and the Trinity. It's a very striking sculpture of about 1500. But just down the road, and also perched on the limestone belt, is this fantastic tower at Castor. It's a crossing tower, which is quite important. And there are other examples which I'll show of crossing towers, which probably indicate an early date. Here, there's this obsession with covering the whole surface with enrichment. It's an astonishing sight, seen here against a blue sky. But inside, there's one of these marvelous angel roofs that are clustered along the A1. I call these A1 angels. They have this kind of soaring, slightly Marsh Harrier stance with the wings pointing very flat but pointing forward, and we'll see some other examples of those. One of the angels I call the angel of the sacred handbag, but it is of course a psaltery, and some of the other angels have musical instruments. That obsession with surface we see very clearly at Ely, not only in the early work here on the West Tower and the west transept there, but it's a tradition, of course, it sets the standard for much later expression of surface decoration of ribs and vaults here in Orcott Chapel. So I think Castor a really crucial and important building. But other crossing towers, here we are at Ickleton, and we're down way beyond, way south of the limestone in the land of cobbles, where freestone is only used for the dressings. An early crossing tower, and of course without ready access to freestone, if you want to spire, timber and lead are the obvious choices. There are treasures also in this church, of course. Here's an angel bench end, and on the west wall of the tower itself, a kind of dome. I say kind of dome because you've got Christ sitting on the rainbow, but here we have Mary and possibly John and some angels. So the inside of towers, the walls inside are also very important. At Falmere, another brown cobbly crossing tower, probably an early base, but a rather later upper stages, and with this rather elegant spirelet, again in lead. A really magnificent bell frame. If you saw my bell frames lecture, a four bell hollow square frame of majestic proportions inside this tower. And at Whittlesford, another crossing tower, almost certainly earlier. We've got the lower stages. Here we've got a round-headed window with this famous, no infamous, sculpture with the Sheila Nig female and this male beast approaching her over the arch. it's the kind of image that one is more familiar with in the West, here from where I'm living now, in Herefordshire, on the eaves of the church at Kilpeck. We always want to ask, why is this kind of imagery there? But I'm afraid I've never yet seen a convincing answer, to a really convincing answer why this kind of sculpture appears both inside and outside of churches. Here, another crossing tower covered in render, probably made of clunch, and perhaps both the tower arches and the upper part are here later. But this tower, this is Histon, has of course great personal significance to me. It was in this little room that I learnt to ring. It was in this room that I made my friends for life, some of them shown here. And I will remember I used to be the flag man here, flags right up at the top. I'd have to climb up through the bells. I'd throw open the trapdoor, and a great crowd of rooks would go up from the trees surrounding the tower. On a cold, frosty morning, it was a delight to have that chore to do. Now, also probably early are the two round towers that we have. Far down in the south, it's very chalky, pale, flinty appearance of Bartlow. And in Bartlow, again, if you saw my bell frames lecture, probably the most important bell installation with a short-headed frame and 3 medieval bells, the whole installation of one early date, medieval date. And so I think the combination here of round tower and the surviving bell installation make this church incredibly significant, as though it didn't have other reasons. Inside, some of the most striking wall paintings of all the churches with towers that I'm looking at, sitting next to each other. You've got St. Michael weighing souls with the Virgin interceding with the weight of her hand on the balance. And this utterly magnificent St. Christopher, which is, as usual, more or less the first thing you see as you come in the door of the church. Here we are at Snailwell, the other round tower, which once had this little spirelet on it. So that's probably a great loss. We do think of towers as strong and enduring, but there are, of course, many forces at work conspiring towards their destruction. Their own great weight, for a start, settling into the ground. And much of Cambridgeshire, particularly when we go into the fens and marsh, struggle to support the weight of the towers. The weather, the wet and the freezing, the mystery of what goes on inside these thick rubble walls, once weather gets in to these rubble cores, who knows what's going on, and the dynamic forces from wind and from bells. We think of them as enduring, but of course not necessarily so. Here at Bilston in Suffolk, a Flint and Cobble tower, like many of those in Cambridgeshire, shows what can happen. So there are several examples. Here at Balsham, magnificent tower, far down into the southeast of Flint and Chalk. This one on very high ground, associated with Bishop Hugh de Balsham in the mid-13th to late 13th century. But here, buttress upon buttress has been added to this tower, giving it a most curious appearance. And finally, in the 1980s, a concrete sleeve was put inside the tower to strengthen it. another example at Landwade, where these great buttresses have been added on the west side. This is an estate church now, a lovely setting, but it contains some of the loveliest and most important medieval glass in Cambridgeshire. So starting our tour there down in the far southeast, these pale, almost ghostly, flinty, chalky churches here, West Wickham and Horseheath. No, the general quality in the middle, a detail of the general quality of the kind of stone that you get down in this part of the county. Here at Horseheath, of course, the scaffolding putlog holes still survive on the tower. At West Ratting, similar, quite close by, similar choice of stone. The difficulty of keeping water out of these cobbly walls has led recently to the rendering of the chancel at West Ratting, the tower almost rendered and lime washed already. There underneath a picture from the faculty application showing the change in appearance. And I wonder if in coming time we'll see this kind of change in the appearance of our cobbly, flinty churches more often. But if we're now travelling north up the east side, we come upon a little group of churches with octagonal towers. And this is always attributed, of course, to the greatest octagon of all time at Ely Cathedral, not made of stone, of course, made of magnificent timbers, but clearly influential here at Wood Ditton and also at Chieveley, very close by. Also, if we cross the A14, this magnificent site of the two churches at Swaffham Prior, it's a site that one never gets over seeing. It's quite marvellous because you normally see it from the road low down, the towers loom. But here, the octagon of an early date and an octagon not influenced by Ely Cathedral. I wouldn't say it was the model for it, but it was an idea already in existence. And the 16-faceted upper stage, also quite early, which I think is probably unique. We just scoot back across the A14 briefly. Two marvellous towers. The further south one, Kirtling, again pale and ghostly. Here the chalk, the clunch tracery, lime washed to help to preserve it. And of course, inside this church, the great monument of the North family. If we go north again, we begin to see a kind of brown, cobbly appearance coming in here at Chippenham. This is nothing particularly distinguished about this tower, but it has already been very much rendered in the recent past. And going further north, Fordham, I was thinking of this as a sort of Suffolk arrangement, really, with a corner turret going up above the parapet of the tower. Fordham, of course, the real important architecture here is the 14th century Lady Chapel. But at Isleham, where I rang my first quarter peal, rather badly struck Bob Doubles, the tower was completely rebuilt. This is a tower that fell, and it was rebuilt by the architect Street. At Isleham, formerly had an arrangement like Fordham, with a little turret going up and a tiny spirelet on top of that. But of course, at Isleham, the great glory is the roof, which astonishes every time you see it, with its 8 queen struts and it's angels bearing instruments, mostly bearing instruments of the Passion. And that can be dated by the donor, Christopher Peyton, to 1495. And he was clearly trying to outdo his Soham neighbours, because Soham has a slightly earlier roof, as we'll just see in a moment, but it only has 6 queen struts, and its angels are far less magnificent. This is Soham. This again must be, I think, a combination of religious and civic pride. It's one of the most magnificent towers, certainly in the eastern quarter, and it's the one that has the finest example of flush work, this East Anglian way of carefully filling in a pattern of in stonework with flint. This also has a queen strut roof and wingless angels. The wings are now lost. This one with an instrument of the mass. It's got a chalice. And Soham has a magnificent 10 bells. I think, I hope you can hear that. Where I ring now is in Leverington Priory is a 10, and I always think when it's well rung to a good rhythm, it actually sounds like iambic pentameters without words. It is, I think, the prettiest number of bells on which to ring. Incidentally, this is one of the few tree ring dated roofs in Cambridgeshire. This is dated to 1477. Not far from there, Bottisham, unusual for being sandwiched between the nave and this Galilee porch, which one would find, of course, at Ely Cathedral. But this is a clunch tower and has clearly suffered very much from the weather over its age, and much of it is rebuilt in the local yellow gaunt brick. Now, whether this this kind of plate tracery, which suggests an early date, is a revival or survival or original, I'm not sure. But Bottisham has famous for, of course, for its monuments. This beautiful one of the 2 children at the end of the north aisle. These are Lionel and Dorothea Wright, the monument of 1638, and no superstition can you see here. It's a very carefully designed monument to avoid all those things which offended the coming Puritan cleansing of churches. And then not far again, one of the most magnificent towers, I think, at Burwell, and made more so by the dated, this is 1799, the dated lantern and spirelet. This again is a church with very strong personal connections. For many years, when I was learning to ring, I drove out over the fen on a Monday night, drove through the Devil's Dyke to their practice night on a Monday evening, to David Gilbert's practice. I haven't heard of David for a long time. I hope that he's still with us and he's still well. And Chris Clare and I would go there regularly. A fine 8, and again, accounts survive for this frame, and it's datable. It's an 18th century frame. The roof here, again, magnificent, and unusually without angels along the wall plate, but strange beasts. So I'm coming back in a kind of zigzag, and make a couple of zigzags back into the cobbly, the brown cobbly zone between Clunch and Limestone into the southern fen. And one of the most recognizable towers is Cottenham. which was rebuilt roughly 1617, 1619, and it has these amazingly familiar and recognizable ogee pinnacles. The lower stage is a freestone, then we've got the local gaunt brick and then a red brick above. Excuse me. Nearby is Land Beach. Land Beach is one of those delightful village churches with many things of interest. I've just shown that lovely Netherlandish angel lectern there. Again, lovely bells to ring, a light ring, ground floor ring, and we used to go and ring for weddings there. And it's a ground floor ring opening into the nave of the church. And in this generally unchurched age, the ringers also served as choir, leading the half-hearted singing that you get at most weddings these days. So another tower with happy memories for me. And here, Girton in its autumn dress. Girton, it's strange, isn't it, how the towers kind of diminish in that part just north of Cambridge. They're not very grand at all. Very previously very fenny, I suppose. There's a magnificent bell frame here in Girton, which I surveyed in a thunderstorm. And here, a huge favourite, the simple and modest tower at Rampton, the thatched church, the well-known thatched church. Again, a ground floor ring that opens with a view of the interior of the church. And I think this is just one of the most modest, charming interiors of any church in Cambridgeshire. So I'm heading north now, and I'm going to zigzag back towards the east, across the fens. Along the edge there, two utterly magnificent churches. Here at Over, a great 14th century exercise, smothered in boarflower, clearly recognizable 14th century details, and these sort of strange flying buttresses over the brooches, which convert a square to an octagon to spring off, to make the tower, the spire spring up in the right shape. But one of the charming things about Over is its range of sculpture. It's rainwater gargoyles. This one, inventively, the maid pouring the rainwater out. Then slightly further north, a kind of fen port, I suppose, sways an important town. And here's a church of this kind of coursed mudstone rubble. This looks very much towards the churches we'll see in Huntingdonshire with its paired belfry openings. I think a very elegant tower, and inside a great menagerie of bench ends, suavely well worth a trip. And slightly north, Bluntisham. Again, a magnificent 14th century, unique 14th century feature at the east end, and the tower with this brown cast, its recessed spire, but very much of the transition between decorated and perpendicular. And zigzagging back to Somersham, a rather more modest affair in the fen with a spirelet, but we can't go further east without encountering the great pepper pot of Sutton. For an essentially rubble stone tower, this is a very grand and ambitious piece of work. I've never found it. I've never found it really quite. It's impressive, but I wouldn't say it's beautiful. I think this strange, almost plate tracery belfry opening and the general proportions, I don't find all that pleasing. But it is huge and impressive. There's no doubt about that. And of course, the octagon looks towards that octagon at Ely Cathedral, which may well have been influential. Then east into the fen, where there's an outcrop of clunch actually in the fen there, and you can see it here. But like other clunch buildings that we've already seen, like Chippenham, it doesn't weather very well, and this tower has been entirely rendered as well. But I'm going right up now to the junction of fen and marsh, and here Elm and Upwell. Elm, a beautiful solid tower with this blind arcading, which is a kind of motif that you see in several of the Marshland churches. This one, Elm, is in Cambridgeshire. It's got clasping buttresses, which tend to suggest early. This is the stair making a sort of clasping buttress. And Upwell here, obviously, I think 13th century date, a bit later up at the top, another octagon. And Upwell famous for its angel roof, and connects back to the church we've just seen at Bluntisham, where Dorothy L. Sayers lived and wrote the 9 Tailors about Lord Peter Wimsey, and a bit of bell ringing in it. And this is the church at Upwell that she based that on. Here at Warsoken, which is really in Norfolk, but you can see it from Cambridgeshire, this local idea of the enriched blind arcaded lower stages comes to the fore. This black and white picture is from the website England's Places, and it's impossible to take that view now because trees have grown up at the front, and you can't get a really good straight tower now. You can't get far enough away to photograph Warsoken, hence this rather leaning picture. Warsoken is full of treasures. Here, one of those 7 sacrament fonts that East Anglia is famous for, and the sacrament on this facade, on this face, is extreme unction, priest and the sick person in bed. But you have to go inside Warsoken to be blown away by this unique angel roof, these rather rustic, almost Baltic-looking angels, and an obsession with the judgment of Solomon. There are several representations. This one against the tower with Solomon in 3D, and a wall painting of the other characters, is quite splendid. Almost a Cambridgeshire church. But the great centre in that part of the county is Wisbeach, and this is, I suppose, a civic church. It's an almost detached tower. Detached towers, very useful in areas of poor ground conditions, because the tower can move without pulling the church itself to pieces as it does it. This tower it isn't started till quite late, possibly not till 1520, and it's got lots of surface decoration and heraldry, quite like any other of the Cambridgeshire churches. A splendid addition. I always find the interior of Wisbeach rather disappointing, but the tower, again with magnificent 10 bells, is a star. Here's another detached tower at Tid St Giles. This is very much detached, and it leans, and it's very much, all the openings, or most of the openings, have been blocked up with brick to try and strengthen it and keep it together. It's a very fine site, and possibly connected with the location of water. It may have been put there to be more prominent, perhaps. But the most stunning detached tower, also visible from Cambridgeshire, but not quite in it, is West Walton. This is a 13th century piece. It's truly magnificent and acts as a gateway into the monastic site. Again here, a superb roof, probably an angel roof, although the wings aren't there now. And it has a series of instruments of the Passion. I couldn't resist putting this picture in. This is a unique instrument of the Passion, a symbol of the Passion in East Anglia. It's the kiss between Christ and Judas, and there a lantern in the foreground. Here, the crown of thorns. This is a fantastic church. The arcade of the nave, almost cathedral-like, and that tower has one of the largest and most magnificent bell frames, which I showed last time. Again, a hollow square, originally 4 bells arranged around a hollow square in the center. Not far from there, another magnificent and quite singular in its appearance tower at Leverington. What makes it so different are these 4 little turrets which sit round the base of the spire. This looms over the flat land round about, and on the west side, which we can't see here, there is vestigial blind arcading like those other Martian churches which I previously showed. And while it has one of the most impressive towers, it also has some of the most impressive stained glass. The Jesse window is famous there, but very much restored. But this is wonderful 15th century glass of Pietà and donors. A church well worth cycling the 40 miles in a headwind, which was John Betjeman's standard for a good church. So coming back south, March, not a parish church until quite late on. This tower built quite late, and it has this unique feature of a hollow way through. I think it's because it's built right against the original boundary of the church. And if you wanted to do processions around the church without going out of the site and onto the road, you would have to go through the tower. That's why they provided that arch. There's a similar arrangement below the chancel at Walpole St. Peter, not far away. Magnificent flint work here, but of course, we all know that the glory of March is the angel roof, which has a series of symbols of the Mass, symbols of the Passion. This is a Mass symbol, and the finest, the greatest band of musicians, angel musicians, of any of East Anglia's angel roofs. So here we go. I'm going north and west now, so I'm drawing nearer to the great limestone belt. This is Whittlesea St. Mary. This belonged to Thorney Abbey and is late 15th century. Here's the England's places photograph. If you want to know, actually, if you want to know why we have conservation laws, and we take conservation, I hope, seriously, go to the England's Places website and just flick through numerous files, look at the pictures and weep at what has happened and why we need not to let more bad things happen. This church now sits in a sort of municipal parkland, whereas previously it sat in this fine, disorganized and charming graveyard. So probably the most magnificent steeple in Cambridgeshire. It's built of fine limestone. It's quite late in date, late 15th century. And it nods again to the west, to Huntingdonshire, with its double belfry openings. In that great book of 50 English steeples, the Julian Flannery's book, he draws it beautifully. And he says here, for it is finished with the most perfect late 15th century spire in England. So praise indeed. But we shouldn't get too carried away, because I showed early on that picture of Louth, which is 287 feet high, and Whittlesea is 100 feet shorter, a whole 100 feet shorter. So I'm going west, going on to the limestone now. And this is Maxey. Of great interest at the lower stage here is early, these narrow, I think, Norman buttresses, a corbel table, and round arches above. The upper stage probably 14th century. It's very little known, I think, and very, very difficult to get into church. It's often been locked when I've tried to go there. And nearby at Marham, hardly a tower at all, an estate church with an early squat tower, which has been overshadowed by this magnificent perpendicular chancel. And perhaps the most elegant of all spires in our survey, a recessed spire, but this incredibly tall spire at Glinton, which adopts, not really detected as on others, this marked curved entasis. This is borrowed from classical architecture, I suppose. Entasis was a way of cheating with perspective, of making tall, thin things look taller, thinner, and even more elegant. So Glinton, marvelous, but whilst its spire is elegant, it has some of the most inelegant gargoyles of any of Cambridgeshire churches. Helpston, hail humble Helpston, the domain of Clare, the poet, another octagon, quite early in date, probably 14th century, the tower arch, simple early English work. And just zooming back south to Yaxley, this is Thorney Abbey's other great spire on the Fen Edge. It bears quite a few relations to Whittlesea, the flying buttresses, but it's really only in its scale. It doesn't have the twin bell openings. It's a more economy version. So I think probably Whittlesea a more prosperous place, and possibly more civic involvement. And just south of there, this quite stunning church at Conington, all very late in date, usually dated in the literature to 1500, but both Andrew Woodger, of whom more later, and the latest buildings of England, O'Brien, suggests that the tower is probably early 17th century, funded by Robert Cotton in 1631 and topped out in 1638. And I was able to more or less date the bell frame to the 1630s, which I think helped it in confirming the dating above. It's a close cousin of Great St Mary's, with the clasping buttresses, and here, this is also very late. Stone was being taken from Ramsey Abbey to be used here as late as 1598. And as I say, the polygonal clasping buttresses bear some relation to Conington. For nearly 20 years, I worked in Shire Hall And this little tower in Cambridge, with its recessed spire, utterly undistinguished. It's not going to be in the 500 towers and spires, let alone the 50. But it was of great personal value to me. I used to go there and find solace and read the visitor's book. I hope the visitor's book is still in use there, because it was where people far less blessed than me poured out all their troubles for other people to read and hopefully to pray about. A delightful little church, marooned in an urban area. But from Conington and our digression to Cambridge, we must turn to the west. The temptation is always to go very much further west into Northamptonshire, where very fine limestone abounds, and the church towers there reflect both that and wealth. The great lantern at Fotheringhay, a similar arrangement at Lowick. And I love this. This is a Churches Conservation Trust church at Aldwinkle. Almost, if Gothic could be classical, this is almost classical. It's a delight, and the church too. But I'm going to begin my little tour of the West here at Brampton, and I'm beginning here because it's that gift to architectural historians. It has a date. In fact, it has the date twice, 1635. Now, Andrew Woodger, the local historian, who I once shared a very interesting car journey with a long time ago, suggested that many of these Huntingdonshire towers were greatly altered or rebuilt in a style he called mixed Gothic between 1540 and 1640. He was a man very much like Cecil Hewitt, who we've already encountered, a man, an empirical man of ideas which he liked and dared to criticize the academic gods of his time. He suggested that one of the principal factors in this period of rebuilding was the development of full circle bell ringing and the demands for people to get up into ringing rooms, to get up into belfries. They needed new staircases, towers needed to be strengthened, and the like. And he points out here, well, here is a bell frame which I call of Huntingdonshire type in Brampton. And he draws attention here in his mixed Gothic to this kind of mixture of, as he calls it, this is disputed by others, of course, this sort of mixture of decorated and perpendicular, and a very, we can't see it here, but a very 13th century kind of frieze of nailhead decoration. So this is an important tower because it's dated, and it indicates that certainly here there was rebuilding of towers in the 17th century, and probably to facilitate more and better bell ringing. But it's agreed that many of the towers are early in date, and perhaps, although it's not quite onto the limestone, we're going back into the land of Clunch of Cobble. This spire at Warboys is given an early date, late 13th, early 14th. And it's typified, I think, by these great brooches, these bits that convert square to octagon. The very large lower spire light here. This is very, again, Huntingdonshire, the double belfry opening. This is a superb composition which looms over the fen. Whereas here at Spaldwick, you'll see that the brooches are very depressed and vestigial, as Andy Woodger called them. And there's a kind of Gothic with transoms and tracery as well, which he thinks is mixed Gothic. So he suggests that this church was rebuilt, the tower was rebuilt in the 17th century. It did occur to me while I was putting this together, of course, that if you were in the 17th century and you had to rebuild your tower, that the impetus to rebuild the spire as well would be small, I think. You don't actually need a spire for bell ringing. It would be sufficient to rebuild the tower. So how much you can put on the theory is debatable. But at Buckworth, again, an early tower and spire, again similar to Warboys, the great brooches, the large lower lights in the spire, but here remarkable and remarkably different treatment of the belfry stage. It's in three. It's got this decoration of masks, which is unique, and the mask stops, which are typical of the of an early date of work coming out, stone coming out of Barnack quarry. So this is an early tower and spire, 13th, early 14th century perhaps. Similarly, Keyston, again the larger, not so large in this case, lower lights in the spire, the paired openings, this marvelously inventive infilling of the paired belfry lights. Personally, I think this is, sorry, I'm not at Buckworth, I'm at Keyston, do forgive me. This is of early date. I think this is probably the most elegant, and if I had to choose a favourite of the Huntingdonshire spires, it would probably be this one. At Brington, this is one that would just suggest is entirely rebuilt. The depressed brooches and the transomed window, a very much simpler and modest affair to the ones that we've seen so far. And Ellington, again, would just suggest is a rebuild, again, typical Huntingdonshire arrangement there, these rather depressed brooches. This has one of the A1 angel roofs. This one has lost its attribute, but preserved its wings. Kimbolton here is thought to be of early date. The larger lower light, the heftier brooches, but Old Western would just suggest was rebuilt in 1612. This is one where he alludes to decorated details being over perpendicular details, but things can change, I suppose, in a different order. But this one is quite unique. It has an octagonal stage before the spire, so the brooches are necessarily very small. That's Old Western, and quite remarkably different from all the others. Great freestone construction. This is Leighton Bromswold. This was built 1634 to 40. There's really nothing Gothic here except the Romanesque, the round arches. You could say Romanesque, that is classical, unpointed. And that kind of archy columny arrangement typifies all the woodwork, the famous woodwork of the George Herbert era here. The tower was funded by the Duke of Lennox, and the original very hefty 4 Norris bells were dated 1641. Close to here, of course, is Little Gidding, and it was at Little Gidding that the trust that I'm speaking on behalf of was founded. The first meetings were at the Little Gidding community, Lady Wedgwood, and the first chairman, Robert Vanderweer, lived in the house, Castle House, almost next door to the church here. So another one which has very strong personal reminiscences for me. So turning south again, more away from the limestone, we come back to Leighton Bromswell, to Buckden. This is again fairly late. This is mid 15th century, rubble stones, and this combination of church and the Bishop's Palace is one of the greatest sights, I think, in Cambridgeshire. This is not a brooch spire, but a recessed spire behind a parapet, but still has the double belfry lights that one associates with Huntingdonshire. It also has a superb angel roof of the A1 variety. It's an elegant building altogether, and one which there's a great deal of very interesting documentation of the building of the tower, building of the belfry. We come then to St Neots, travelling south. Here must be civic pride like Wisbeach, and this is again the paired openings, but a very enriched surface. The buttresses have little pinnacles, which O'Brien suggests is a very much a Somerset arrangement. And lest we get vain about the grandeur of Cambridgeshire architecture, this is Taunton, which has the Somerset, which has the pinnacles on its buttresses. It's an order of magnitude more splendid, really, than most of the churches that we can boast. It is, of course, very close to the limestone belt. If you've ever been to Ham Hill, this lovely honey-coloured stone comes from there. And moving on towards the southwest corner of the county, we've got Great Stalton. Which was, again, surprisingly late in 1552, this was completed. And Great Granston, which on a more modest scale continues the double belfry openings. This was, it suggested that this was entirely rebuilt quite late on in 1686. Both have the little spirelets, lead spirelets, which are always a great addition and decoration to these towers. Not far away from here, that singular tower at Diddington. I don't think there's another completely brick tower, or more or less completely brick tower like this one. It's normally given the time of Henry VIII, 1509 to 47, possibly the only complete brick tower in the West. Here again, a fascinating church. The tower is just part of a much greater significance, and some excellent glass, 15th century glass. Here we have St. Catherine with her wheel, of course. And not far again, another almost singular tower, a timber frame tower at Hale Weston. This is my measured drawing from my Bell survey. Originally, this was gabled, and the whole thing was weatherboarded rather than shingled. And O'Brien suggests that it's very much related to cousins in Essex, which date from before 1500. So turning at last the very far southwest, we come back onto the Clunch, onto the band of Clunch, and these two images are both from their parish websites. And we've got Barrington high on the Clunch, near the cement works, and the country survived fairly well here, and Haslingfield with its clasping buttresses and corner turrets. Haslingfield is normally given as perpendicular, but there's something of the Huntingdonshire about this. There's the paired belfry openings, the clasping buttresses, and the stair has a notch in it where the newel meets the where the tread meets the newel, which Woodger says is typical of his mixed Gothic style. Also, the bell frame here is of Huntingdonshire type, so I wonder if this is rather later than we all think it is. It's a 17th century rebuild, perhaps. And finally, back onto the Cobble, this charming composition at Bourne of the brown stone with the stone dressings, and the quirkiest spire in the east, I think, built in 2 stages. Of course, here, no freestone, so it's built of lead, timber and lead, but an early-ish composition with this 13th century arcading, possibly a later tower stair added. And the quirky arrangement at Steeple Morden. The original steeple here fell in 1625, and a new one was built over the porch. This one is a further rebuild of 1866. There's the old rhyme, Steeple Morden, silly people, they sold the bells to build the steeple. Whether that's true, I'm not entirely sure. But in the furthest southwest corner is Abbottsley. So we've come onto that thin thread of cast stone, the dark brown stone, which runs from this southwest corner of Cambridgeshire up. If you want to see a lot of it, go to Downham Market in Norfolk, and then up to the Norfolk coast at Huntston. So there are big blocks of the brown stone in this. But here at Abbottsley, the church, the tower, is distinguished by these 4 bizarre pinnacles. Now, these are quite unique, and they're said to represent, and I really don't know if this is true, they're said to represent the kings, Harold and William of England, William the Conqueror, that is, and the Scottish kings, Malcolm and Macbeth. The south side pinnacles, which I pointed out, are original, but these north side ones are 19th century replacement. So on that quirky note, I bring my tour to a close. I hope you've enjoyed it. I quite enjoyed putting it together. It was full of happy memories for me, and thank you very much. So I'm stopping screen share and I'm looking at the notes.
Thank you, Robert, for an absolutely fascinating tour of Cambridgeshire, and some most interesting information about not only the style, but the construction, and in many cases the dates of these structures. So yes, we have from John Peverley this question: how did they actually build a stone spire? Can you enlighten us on that, Robert?
Well, if the best, a kind of sideways answer to this is to go and read William Golding's book, The Spire, which is all about the building of a spire. And it has to be, there's little alternative but scaffolding, and of course scaffolding in medieval times was pretty hair-raising, lashed together wooden scaffolding. And with a spire, you're always trying to balance, although balance isn't the right word, the mass of the building with its ability to resist wind pressure. So this is why you get great rods down through spires with additional weight bringing the weight back down, perhaps to cross timbers or something like that. And so it was built. It was built almost. They were built almost certainly off of scaffolding. And they have to be accurately, I mean, very accurately made, and they've got to piece together very, very well indeed. I was a site engineer on modern buildings, and getting a building upright is even with modern equipment, is a non-trivial matter. Getting a very tall spire, a St Mary's spire, upright with a plumb bob is a great difficulty indeed.
Right, thanks very much. Yes, I think our other pieces of chat were about they were procedural rather than about the substance of your talk. No, I was particularly intrigued, Robert, by what you said about the Huntingdonshire spires, what I call the A14 spires, that come one after the other as you go west along the A14. And certainly I had no idea that that there was a theory that any of them were later rebuilds. I'd always imagined that one village after another had said, look, we rather like the one in X, can you build us one like it? So it sounds as if that that was not the case.
Well, I think the original impetus, there are numerous causes. I think patronage is of course crucial, and although I mean it's a theory that one might put to the test that the monastic ownership of an advowson is kind of correlated with whether you have a spire or not. That might be tested, but of course Andrew Woodger points out, and I should say there are two papers in the Archaeological Journal. They're very easy to find on the internet. There's Andrew Woodger's paper itself, and there's a critique of it, and they're well worth a read. I recommend them. I'm not clever enough to seriously comment on them. I think there are some interesting points, but he does suggest that by the time people were beginning to bell ring seriously, to A, use towers more, B, put more forces onto them, many of the towers were already very ancient and in poor condition, and may have necessitated rebuilding. He does also point out that, I mean, traditionally, the chancel is looked after by the owner of the advowson, but the parishioners look after the rest of the church, and thinks it very important that the building of towers was perhaps much more a civic and parish effort than one of the, if you like, the ecclesiastical patron. But it is complex, isn't it? Things fall down, things need mending. It's why the spires are so popular there. I can't explain otherwise. It would be trivial to say it's just merely fashion and competition between villages. I'm not sure that explains it, but I can't give you a full answer.
Now, I suppose the fashion for fairly tall, elegant spires may have come. Would the proximity to Northamptonshire be relevant there, because there are quite a lot there, aren't there?
Well, I think they must be influenced by Northamptonshire, which where great things can be seen. But one of the things that puzzles me is about their landscape impact. If you were competing, Brington, for example, is right on the escarpment and is magnificent and seen from a long, long way around. But some of the churches are not that prominent. I'm not sure that the spire makes them stand out hugely more in the landscape in every case. I guess it's a local tradition. Yes, Huntingdonshire spires.
Yes, I don't think there are any more questions in chat, are there? Are we? There's somebody else. Yes. Yes. Any ideas why St Clement Cambridge timber spire was taken down? St Clement's, am I thinking of the right one? Is that the one which is now it's in Magdalen Street or Bridge Street, and is the one which is shared with an Orthodox church? Is that the one? I think it
yes,
is.
that's St Clement's, and it's got my recollection is it's got a tiny spire, which is possibly not medieval. But no, I don't know why it was taken down. But I guess spires take the full brunt of the weather. If they're very exposed, they're quite difficult and expensive to mend. So it may well have been not to incur the expense. But I could look into it and find an answer. Is that Graham Pledger? It's just Graham.
I don't think it was. No, who was that?
Yes.
Yes, I'm not sure.
So yes, he agrees it's not medieval. It was 1823, but it's quite a long time since I saw it.
Well, if there are no other questions in chat, thank you again, Robert, for an absolutely brilliant discourse, most informative and interesting. Well, sorry about the technical hitches right at the start, but anyway, we
worse things happen at sea.
Pardon?
Worse things happen at sea.
Well, yes, but no. But Zoom etiquette is something we're still on a learning curve, even after these 18 months, aren't we? So thank you all of those of you who attended this most interesting lecture, and we hope to see some of you, well, to see all of you if possible again. We haven't anything else actually organized yet for further Zoom sessions over the winter. Though there's a certain advantage in doing this sort of exercise during the dark days when one may not want to venture out to look at churches in person. The next thing we actually have in our calendar is a conference which we are very much hoping we can again hold in person at Wolfson College on the 2nd of April next year. Well, I'd better not divulge the subject matter, which is only, I suppose, is tentative at the moment, but we will be circulating details of that. So do keep an eye on our website and watch for future events, because we shall be doing some more by Zoom over the winter. So thanks again, Robert, for a brilliant evening, and thank you everybody for attending.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.